are countless Washington figures who've made an entire career out of being perpetually wrong, but in all the right ways. It's amazing how you can excel in this town simply by adopting all of the DC-approved wrong takes, some, by the way, with utterly disastrous consequences. One of the individuals who has successfully charted such a career path is New York Magazine's Jonathan Chait. And now he has added another doozy to his list of extraordinarily bad takes. Ready for this one? At a time when our country is blocking aid to people who are starving by defunding UNRWA and shipping 2,000-pound bombs to be dropped on babies in refugee camps, Jonathan Chait has identified the real villain in the situation, the activists who disrupt democratic elite political events calling for a ceasefire and an end to genocide. Here is that piece. The headline is, "The Left-Wing Authoritarians Shutting Down the Democratic Party." In it, Chait invites us to imagine a world in which Trump-aligned protesters are able to disrupt and drown out a Jamie Raskin speech on democracy. The horror! He then posits that it would be obvious that such a tactic was unacceptable in principle. But since it's pro-Palestine protesters using this method, criticism has been muted on a fear that to aggressively disagree with such protesters would risk permanently alienating them from the Biden coalition. Chait writes, quote, "This pattern of behavior is illiberal and dangerous, drowning out speakers and disrupting exercises in politics regardless of its cause or the target is wrong on principle." Now, before I engage with the details of his willfully bankrupt arguments, let's start with the most obvious and, frankly, most important point. Jonathan Chait is a well-paid, well-connected columnist for New York Magazine who can apparently write and publish pretty much whatever the hell he wants. And his choice right now is to tone police the protesters desperately trying to feed starving babies, block an ethnic cleansing, and stop a genocide. Imagine tut-tutting the abolitionists for their unseemly tactics. You know, harboring fugitive slaves is wrong on principle. You can imagine a 19th century Chait opining. Or imagine scolding civil rights activists for disrupting ordinary Americans' lunch counter experience. Sure, I may have some quibbles with Jim Crow, but these lefty Marxists are out of control. Or had he lived in Germany during World War II, excoriating those secretly plotting Hitler's overthrow. These are illiberal tactics, Chait may have declared. Now, not a single reasonable person would look back upon such a person making these arguments and see righteousness, justice, or liberalism. Instead, it is atrocity apologia, or more to the point, if disrupting a Joe Biden speech is illiberal, how shall we describe secretly expediting over 100 shipments of weapons to massacre children who we are simultaneously helping to starve to death? But Jonathan Chait is a man determined to place himself on the wrong side of history at every chance he possibly can. During the Iraq War, you could find him in the pages of the Washington Post, castigating liberals not to go along with those crazy lefties who were doubting the ironclad evidence of Saddam's WMDs. He wrote, and I quote, "The notion that Bush made up the whole thing about weapons of mass destruction has taken root on the left and is creeping ever closer to the liberal mainstream. My fellow liberals who have taken up this line are once again making a disastrous misjudgment." He argued in 2016 that liberals should, quote, "earnestly and patriotically support a Trump nomination because Chait was so confident that Trump would lose to Hillary." Now, after getting his Trump nomination wish, he then wrote this column, which aged like sour milk, headlined, "Trump Won't Win Michigan." In general, Chait's beat is to serve as an anti-left reactionary, wherever you find the left staking out some position on an issue, whether it is opposing the Iraq War, correctly, criticizing Obama, correctly, supporting Bernie over Hillary, correctly, or opposing genocide, correctly. You will find Jonathan Chait working feverishly on a column explaining why these positions are an affront to decency and not the stuff of serious fellows such as himself. And so it is with this particular column. Let's go ahead and dive in, shall we? First, Chait claims in his initial setup that these activists, the pro-Palestine activists, have been handled with kid gloves by those who should be trashing them, writing, quote, "Because Democrats perceive some of the protesters as potential Biden voters, they have soft-pedaled their criticism of their tactics." Oh, really? Tell that to Nancy Pelosi, who just reiterated her suggestion that ceasefire protesters were effectively traitors doing the bidding of Vladimir Putin. On the contrary, pro-Palestine activists have been relentlessly smeared, doxxed, and subjected to abuse since the outset of this conflict, and before, by the way. You may recall an entire multi-day news cycle around the activities of protesters on college campuses. This smear campaign was then supercharged by billionaire Bill Ackman, who sought to blacklist pro-Palestine activists from ever getting hired by anyone. You might recall Rashida Tlaib being officially censured by Congress, backed by the votes of dozens of Democrats, for retweeting a protest call for equal rights for all from the river to the sea. Similar censures for those Republicans calling for Gaza to be nuked or for all Palestinians to be slaughtered have not been forthcoming. You might also recall Karine Jean-Pierre standing at the White House podium and saying that ceasefire calls were, quote, repugnant. And it's not even remarkable at this point when protesters are branded anti-Semitic for criticizing a genocide and the ideology that lies behind it. But if these relentless attacks were not enough for you, don't worry, Jonathan Chait is on the case. Now, he argues his qualm is not with all protesters, just with those who use what he deems to be illiberal tactics. Quote, I'm not referring to tactics like holding protest marches, speeches, social media posts, organizing uncommitted votes in the Democratic primary, or other exercises of First Amendment rights. I'm specifically referring to a campaign to shut down speakers who oppose, or even in many cases simply decline to endorse the movement's agenda. He argues that he is simply looking to protect the speech of those like the president, who is just doing his earnest best to participate in this glorious democracy of ours. First of all, with regard to the president specifically, if Joe Biden would like to avail himself of more opportunities to speak to the American people, I know I, for one, would really welcome that. Perhaps he could sit for more news interviews since he has done vastly fewer than any other president in modern history. Perhaps he could agree to debate his opponents, as he refused to do in the Democratic primary and has as of yet not committed to do in the general election. Speaking, though, more broadly of the speech rights of Democratic Party congresspeople, let's compare, shall we? The amount of speech permitted by the pro-Zionist side versus the anti-genocide side. Last week, I interviewed Motaz Salem. He's a Palestinian-American activist. He's seen more than 100 of his family members killed in Gaza. I cannot even begin to comprehend this level of loss or what it might do to me or what actions it might lead me to take, frankly. But Motaz has channeled his grief and rage righteously. He spends his days stalking the halls of Congress, confronting members wherever he can find them, hoping that some way, somehow, their humanity and shame will catch up with them as they realize what they have done. Hoping that perhaps, if they can see him as a real, full human being, they might also see those children starving to death or those parents slaughtered seeking aid, his own family members. Maybe they will see them as real, full human beings too. Yesterday, Motaz was part of a group in which some members were arrested for shutting down the Senate cafeteria. In other words, he is engaging in the sort of confrontational tactics that Chait deems, quote unquote, illiberal. Now, Motaz is doing everything he can to nonviolently make his speech heard. But in American politics, all of the odds are stacked up against him because not only is speech speech, money is also speech. And one of the best funded political organizations in the entire country is dedicated to making sure that Motaz's speech is never heard. That would be AIPAC, of course, which has pledged to spend $100 million to block any candidate with even the potential to criticize the Israeli government and to punish those who already have. The long-standing bipartisan commitment to unconditional Israeli government support is a testament to the strength of AIPAC's extremely well-funded speech. What's more, Biden and the Democrats will have literally billions of dollars in this election cycle to back up their de facto pro-genocide speech. So while Motaz and his fellow activists, God bless them, are undoubtedly a constant source of irritation for Joe Biden and Karine Jean-Pierre and Tony Blinken and many others, it's not because it seriously impacts those people's free speech. It's an insult to all of our intelligence to pretend that is actually the case. How can the speech of Motaz compete against the billions of dollars in presidential bully pulpit arrayed against it? It's an irritation because these powerful people must be confronted on a daily basis with what frauds they really are. How they use the language of humanitarian values and international law right up to the moment that it became uncomfortable for them. And now they have greenlit, armed, and assisted one of the worst atrocities in recent history. Adding insult to injurious stupidity, Chait has a suggestion for how these protesters should properly go about making their views heard in our great democracy. He writes, the pro-Palestinian movement is barely even attempting democratic participation. The movement could have run an anti-Israel candidate against Biden, but never bothered, no doubt anticipating they would lose. Okay, first of all, both Cornel West and Jill Stein do exist and are running. And in case you were wondering about Chait's enthusiasm for allowing such candidates to participate in our democratic process, he's also the type that will definitely smear third-party candidates as being secret Trump lovers. But I also wonder if Jonathan Chait is aware Joe Biden had primary opponents and they were completely shut out by the Democratic Party and the corporate press. How's that for illiberal? And I am not talking about figuratively speaking here. The DNC ordered the primary states to best benefit Joe Biden. They refused to host any debates. And as if that wasn't enough, key state Democratic parties just blocked Biden opponents from being placed on the ballot and canceled their primaries altogether. There literally was not an electoral process to participate in. The party effectively canceled it. As David Sirota pointed out, quote, when a political party makes it impossible to express dissent inside a normal process, it should probably expect that people will then try to express dissent outside the normal process. If you want activists to use more polite tactics, maybe get outraged about these genuinely illiberal and authoritarian tactics that have left so many feeling like their democratic free speech rights are effectively meaningless. Or, if you're looking to be outraged, maybe, just maybe, get outraged at the powerful politicians who are responsible for this annihilation, providing diplomatic cover, shipping weapons that make such destruction possible and inevitable. Those who are responsible for starving these children through their inaction and through actively defunding the primary aid organization that could serve them. I might suggest this could be a more worthy use of your time and of ours, by the way. Jonathan Chait closes out his piece with this line, quote, if your movement's goal is to prevent those who disagree from expressing themselves and you delight in meting out abuse and humiliation to your targets, you're showing the world you cannot be trusted with power. Yes, let's allow the serious people to hold power, the ones who are serious about supporting the slaughter of more than 15,000 children as the world watches in horror. These are the types in whom Jonathan Chait places his trust. And if you don't like it, then you can send a strongly worded letter so long as it is in the proper cordial tone and doesn't have a prayer of changing a goddamn thing. And Emily, I also think this— Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.